They tell you Patrick Ewing was built for pressure. They tell you some men are born strong. They tell you greatness always survives the weight placed on it. But what they never tell you is how slowly that weight can crush a human being from the inside, without making a sound. Patrick Ewing did not become silent because he was arrogant or distant. He became silent because silence once kept him alive. Long before the crowds, long before the chants echoing through Madison Square Garden, Patrick learned that speaking rarely changed outcomes, but endurance did. That lesson was not taught in a classroom or on a basketball court. It was taught in a small house in Kingston, Jamaica, where survival mattered more than comfort and feelings were treated as unnecessary weight. In that house, poverty was not dramatic or sudden. It was constant. Food was measured. Space was shared. Noise was discouraged. Children learned early that complaining did not bring relief. It only added tension. So Patrick learned to observe, to listen, and most importantly, to hold everything inside. Emotions were not something to explore. They were something to suppress. That discipline would later be praised as mental toughness, but at its core, it was emotional isolation formed far too early. When Patrick's family moved to America, the silence followed him like a shadow. The move was not a fresh beginning full of opportunity. It was disorientation. A tall Jamaican boy with a thick accent and dark skin walking into unfamiliar hallways where he was noticed before he was known. Teachers saw his size before his personality. Other students saw his difference before his humanity. Patrick quickly understood that attention was dangerous. Standing out invited judgment. So he did what he already knew how to do. He stayed quiet and endured. Basketball entered his life not as an escape, but as a tool. On the court, effort replaced explanation. Movement replaced speech. Here, his body could speak in ways his voice never had. But even in this space, he carried the same habits. He worked more than he celebrated. He trained more than he expressed. Basketball did not teach him how to be free. It taught him how to be useful. By the time Patrick reached Georgetown University, his identity was already shaped by discipline and silence. But Georgetown did something far more dangerous than sharpening his skills. It turned him into a symbol. Under coach John Thompson, Patrick was not simply developed as a player. He was elevated as representation. Proof. Hope. A living answer to a system that had long denied respect to young black men. Patrick understood this responsibility immediately, even if no one spelled it out. From that moment on, failure was no longer personal. It was collective. And collective failure is never forgiven. Every game became heavier than the last. Every mistake felt larger than the moment it occurred. Applause did not feel like encouragement. It felt like obligation. Patrick learned to place himself second to expectation, not because he wanted to, but because he did not know any other way to survive. He had been doing it his entire life. When the NBA draft arrived and New York called his name, Patrick Ewing's life was effectively handed over to a city that does not tolerate patience. New York did not welcome him as a young man learning his way. They welcomed him as a savior. Decades of frustration, unfinished dreams, and restless anger were quietly transferred onto his shoulders. And Patrick, trained by a lifetime of silence, accepted it without protest. In New York, Patrick learned a brutal truth very quickly. Losing was not disappointment. It was sin. Effort was irrelevant without results. And pain was not something anyone wanted to hear about. In the physical NBA era of the 80s and 90s, toughness was measured by how much damage you could absorb without speaking. Patrick absorbed everything. Injuries became routine. Knees swollen. Back inflamed. Shoulders aching. But rest was dangerous. Rest created doubt. Doubt led to replacement. And replacement meant disappearing. Patrick feared invisibility more than pain. So he played. Not at full strength, but at full responsibility. Behind locker room doors, the reality was far from heroic. Ice packs replaced celebration. Needles replaced recovery. Silence replaced comfort. There were nights when simply standing up hurt more than playing an entire game. But Patrick never allowed that version of himself to exist in public. Because public weakness would have shattered the image everyone depended on. The media misunderstood him completely. They called him cold, aloof, emotionless. They never asked why a man who carried so much spoke so little. They never considered that silence might not be personality, but armor. As the seasons passed without a championship, the pressure intensified. Patrick became the easiest target because he never defended himself. He did not point fingers. He did not argue. He stood at the microphone after losses and accepted blame with short, restrained answers. Responsibility had become instinct. The 1994 NBA Finals marked a quiet fracture that never fully healed. 6 games. 1 missed ring. And suddenly years of effort were reduced to absence. What he had not delivered became more important than everything he had carried. History needed a simplified story, and Patrick Ewing became the convenient explanation. Jordan's dominance rewrote the league, and everyone standing in his shadow was judged accordingly. Each Knicks loss to Chicago was framed as Patrick's limitation. The system, the matchups, the physical toll, none of it mattered. Only the final outcome remained. Inside, Patrick felt something shift. Not anger. Not rebellion. Just deepening isolation. The harder he tried, the more trapped he became in expectation. Endurance stopped feeling like strength, and started feeling like punishment. His private life suffered quietly alongside his public battles. His marriage did not collapse under scandal or betrayal. It eroded under absence. Emotional distance. Long stretches where Patrick was physically present but mentally elsewhere. He did not know how to speak exhaustion. He had never learned how. Silence, which once protected him, now built walls even those closest to him could not cross. Still, he kept going. He played through pain because stopping felt like surrender. He accepted criticism because defending himself felt unfamiliar. He lived as if carrying everything alone was simply the price of being who he was. And the most dangerous part was this. Because he never collapsed, no one thought to catch him. The silence that surrounded Patrick Ewing did not come from a single loss or a single season. It thickened over time, like layers added slowly until even he could no longer remember what it felt like to exist without weight. As the years passed, the New York Knicks continued to contend, continued to fight, continued to fall just short. And every time they did, the story was retold in simpler and harsher terms. Patrick Ewing had not delivered. Patrick Ewing had not finished the job. Patrick Ewing was strong, but not enough. What made this judgment particularly cruel was that it ignored the reality of how the game was played in that era. Centers were punished nightly. The paint was a war zone. Bodies collided without mercy. Patrick absorbed more contact than most players of his generation, and he did it while carrying the psychological burden of leadership. He was expected to anchor the defense, dominate the post, calm his teammates, face the media, and still appear unaffected by the grind. There was no room for fatigue in the image he was required to maintain. Over time, Patrick began to live almost entirely inside routine. Wake up. Practice. Play. Treat pain. Repeat. Routine became his way of surviving without having to confront how empty he was becoming. When the body hurt, he ignored it. When disappointment surfaced, he buried it. There was no space to ask what he wanted because everything had already been decided for him. He existed to carry expectations, not to explore himself. The Jordan years were particularly damaging. Every playoff loss to Chicago added a new layer of public humiliation. Michael Jordan was celebrated as destiny. Patrick Ewing was framed as the obstacle that destiny kept crushing. The comparison was unfair, but it was irresistible to the media. Jordan won. Ewing did not. That was all the narrative required. And because Patrick never pushed back, never defended his context, never demanded a more honest conversation, the narrative hardened. Inside the locker room, teammates respected him deeply. They saw what he played through. They saw the injections, the ice, the stiffness that never fully left his body. But respect does not protect you from isolation. Leadership can be lonely, especially when you believe that expressing doubt would weaken the group. Patrick carried himself as an example, but that example came at the cost of his inner life.